Welcome back to Tackle the Numbers, the channel where I struggle with the inconsistency of MLR teams. My name is Alistair Poole. In case you didn't know already, this video also exists as a podcast. If you'd rather listen than watch, follow the link in the video description. This week saw a correction of the accuracy of the GRI back towards normal. It still wasn't enough to overcome Houston's Week 2 shutout, which is still messing up all of the accuracy data. Eventually, there'll be enough other data points to override that outlier, and it won't be so much of a problem, but the data is what it is. Getting to the matches this last weekend, the first match of the week had New England winning their first ever home match against Utah. Utah had been expected to take this by a hair, 24-23, but the Free Jacks managed to look good for the second week in a row. They scraped out a 22-21 win. This match barely moved the needle for Utah. Their attack remains completely unchanged at 1.2, while their defensive baseline has improved fractionally to 24.8. Overall, this leads to the slightest of upticks in their combined margin at 1.2. The Free Jacks, on the other hand, backed up their good showing last week. Their attacking average is drifting gently downward, now at minus 1.4, but their defense, which just 2 weeks ago was a stratospheric 37.3, is now at 23.9, which is good. Overall, that puts them tied with Utah at a combined margin of 1.2 points. Next up is another upset, with Toronto going to DC and blowing out Old Glory 40-19. Old Glory had been predicted to take this one by 3, 24-21. Toronto managed to recover some of their pride with this win. Their defense improved to 24.6 points, and their attack went up 2 points to minus 0.6, which overall led to a 1-point bump in their combined margin. My model is not convinced that Toronto is fully back or anything, but they are at least headed in the right direction again. Meanwhile, giving up 40 points was not a good look for Old Glory. Their defensive baseline took an understandable hit, went up by 6 points to a subpar 28.9. That brought their combined margin down by 2 points to minus 0.5. They continued to improve on attack, though, going up to 3.8. That might be surprising for some people after this week, but it's a 5-week average, and they're replacing a relatively poor performance against Houston last year, so they still get a slight bump. The second blowout upset of the week had the Legion being wiped out 22-41 in Atlanta. They had been expected to take it by 2, 23-21, and instead lost by 19. The GRI is really struggling to get a read on this team. 1 minute they're holding a team to 11 points, and the next they're letting their opponents run all over them. Their defensive baseline, which has been bouncing between great and mediocre, now sits at 26.6, pretty much exactly average. Their attack hasn't changed, staying at minus 2.2, and their combined margin, which had a brief rally last week, is now down at minus 0.5. Yes, folks, San Diego is officially a below-average team. Imagine telling that to yourself before the season started. Rugby ATL didn't see a big boost, though. Their attacking average jumped up to 1.4, which was good, but their defensive baseline stayed basically the same at 25 points, and their combined margin only rose a little bit to 1.1. Now, for the final match of the week, I stressed that it was very important that Houston put at least some points on the board this week. Apparently, though, that was too much to ask. Houston, who had been expected to lose 19-24, instead lost 0-26, and for the second week in a row, laid a goose egg. Houston took such a hit last week, though, that there isn't a lot farther for them to fall on attack, especially since Austin is considered an excellent defensive team, meaning the shutout hurts less than it could. Overall, though, the situation still isn't pretty. Houston's attack is a dismal minus 11.2, while their defense is a meh 27.7. Overall, they are at a minus 2.9 point combined margin. I know that a bunch of you are going to think that Houston is getting off lightly here, but basically, they're keeping their opponents within a reasonable distance on defense, and on attack, it's statistically unlikely that they don't at least somewhat bounce back. Austin, on the other hand, is continuing its meteoric rise. Their defense at 15.2 is on par with the best defenses we've ever seen in the league. Their attack is continuing to sink. It's currently at minus 4.6, but that has not stopped their combined margin from rocketing to a league-leading 5.4 points. I'm still a little bit in disbelief at this score. It certainly seems crazy, especially when you consider where they were to begin the season. But, I guess we'll see whether this is maintainable for Austin. That was all the matches for last week. It was a short week with 4 teams having bye. In the rankings, San Diego dropped 5 spots and Old Glory dropped 7 spots, and that pretty much shuffled everyone up a couple spots. The big jump this week came again from Austin, who are now top of the league. You could even say that they are elite. A quick note, you may have noticed that some teams that didn't play last week have slightly different numbers. This is because of the opponent adjustments on attack are shifting. Rooney has taken a hit, for example, because San Diego is no longer considered a good defensive team. It hasn't hugely affected the rankings, though. We're far enough into this season now that there are some teams that are ranked above teams that they lost to. I'm going to take this moment to point out something that seems obvious but is often forgotten. Let's take 3 teams for an example. Old Glory DC, Rugby ATL, and the Toronto Arrows. In Week 1, Atlanta beat Toronto. In Week 2, DC beat Atlanta. In Week 3, Toronto beat DC. No matter how you rank these teams, at least one of them will be ranked over a team that they lost to. In my model, it's Old Glory that's at the bottom, despite the fact that they beat Rugby ATL. And this is partly recency bias, and also partly that they were the only ones to get blown out. What this shows really is that winning, while in some ways the only thing that matters at the end of the day, is only a very rough measure of skill. Bad teams can win, and good teams can lose. I just wanted to point that out. Moving on. The first match next week is part 1 of the doubleheader in New Orleans. LA takes on the Arrows, and are favored to win by 4, 27-23. This equates to a 62% chance to win. This will be the best defense by my numbers that LA has faced yet. Will they dominate once again? Who knows? Part 2 of the doubleheader brings on the match that I'm most excited to see, Austin against NOLA. Austin is favored to take this by 3 points, 22-19. This will be a huge test for Austin. If they can put up a good show against NOLA, then I will be convinced that they are actually legit. And let's just take a moment to think about the fact that an unbiased computer is actually picking Austin over NOLA. That is wild. Next up is an important East Conference matchup, Rooney visiting Atlanta. ATL is expected to take it by 4 points, 28-24. That's a 61% chance of victory for the home team. This might be more high scoring than I'm predicting though, since Rooney really hasn't shown any ability to keep teams out of the end zone, so we'll see. The next match is San Diego against Houston. The prediction for this one is for the Legion to take it by just 2 points, 24-22. Given their recent performance, I don't think anyone is going to take Houston to cover here. I mean, sure, San Diego is up and down this year, especially on defense, but this is a historically bad Houston attack. Still, we should expect the Sabercats to put up at least 10 points. They weren't too far off scoring something last weekend, and if nothing else, Sam Windsor will almost definitely get some kicks through the uprights. Last up is Seattle, heading into the mountains to play Utah. Because we last saw the Seawolves allowing 57 points, the line stands at 8 points in favor of the Warriors. They are expected to win 32-24. That's about a 72% chance to win. This is the biggest spread my model has predicted all year. Utah has looked reasonably good, so maybe it plays out this way, but 8 points is a lot to cover. That's all of the upcoming matches. I'm expecting to see 1 to 2 upsets again this week, although, like last week, 3 isn't out of the question. There's a 3 out of 4 chance that my model gets more matches right than wrong. Well, that's all from me for this week. Remember, if you want to pick against my numbers, you can do so over at tacklethenumbers.gloriousrugby.com. If you have questions or comments for the show, you can reach me at tacklethenumbers@gloriousrugby.com. Till next time, folks.